In my last video, I shared the worst open water disaster on the Great Lakes, the loss of the Lady Elgin in 1860. Rescue runs were again run 9 years later when the lumber schooner Storm ran aground. Divinity student Joseph Hartzell swimming a lifeline to the wreck that the crew used to bring themselves to shore. 6 months after that, the Arrow stranded near Grosse Pointe, and 6 men and a would-be rescuer died. A Navy lifeboat was donated to Northwestern College, where volunteer students trained for rescues. Surviving logbooks of the life-saving station indicate William Evans King was keeper during the late 1870s. True to the tradition, he was a seminary student just like Edward Spencer. The wreck reports for 1879 show Captain King and his students were busy October 12th, responding to the schooner Thomas Sims, which had grounded in thick fog about 8 miles north of the station. Captain King would become Reverend King after graduation, transferring to Montana with his wife Jenny. A local fisherman assumed command in 1880, and many at the school were upset that it wasn't a student from Northwestern. But Lawrence Lawson would prove a good captain for the Evanston crew. Lawson was the man who spotted the sunken Wells Burt in May of 1883, and he helped discover and extinguish a fire in Northwestern's preparatory building just a few days later. That building would remain as the oldest building on campus for over 100 years until lightning set it ablaze and it was razed in 1973. Lawson and his team spotted the distress flag of the schooner Cuyahoga in December of 1883, saving the ship and its cargo of railroad ties. But it was 7 seasons later when Lawson and his boys would find the highest honor for lifesavers, gold medals, for risking their lives to save 18 others aboard a steamer loaded with coal for Milwaukee. Captain Orville Green missed Milwaukee completely in what was described as the fiercest blizzard in memory. It was November 27th, and he realized the pump they had put on in Detroit wasn't keeping up with the water that was coming into the Calumet. They had hit an anchor in the Detroit River and they'd hoped to get repairs in Wisconsin, but now his only option was to try for Chicago, and the water was gaining fast. Off Fort Sheridan, he began blowing distress signals on the whistle. He turned the Calumet for shore, hoping to hit a reef to prevent the steamer from foundering in deep water. His call for help was heard and telegraphed to the police station at Evanston, where the lifesavers were notified. Captain Lawson immediately ran to the train depot, finding the next passenger train wasn't until morning. He was told they could stop a freight train heading north in just a half hour, so he quickly sloshed through the snow to wake up his team. In this storm, the largest schooner on the lakes was sunk. The Albany limped into Chicago without its pilot house, and Captain Lawson found help from the 6th U.S. Infantry at the fort to unload the boat and chop a path to Lake Michigan. An 80-foot cliff slowed their launch, but with 50 soldiers and a gathering army of locals, they got the boat to the water to search in the blinding snow. The eyewitness had put them in the wrong spot, so they ran to shore and regrouped, finally spotting the Calumet with its back broken on a reef. Captain Green had opened the seacocks in his steamer to allow the ship to fill with lake water, holding it fast until the lifeboat pulled alongside. After 3 trips, all 18 men were safely ashore, sipping coffee and being escorted to the Army barracks nearby. It was Thursday, Thanksgiving morning, and the lifesavers were back in Evanston for their holiday meal. The annual report said of the Calumet's crew, truly a day for Thanksgiving for their happy escape from a watery grave. 7 of the 8 gold medals awarded that year by the Secretary of the Treasury went to the men at Evanston Life-Saving Station. The team was also called into action during one of Lake Michigan's worst gales, the spring storm of 1894. This had destroyed 7 schooners at Chicago and pushed another aground at Racine. Evanston was called out to rescue the lumber schooner Lincoln Doll, which had lost 3 sailors to the storm before running aground 8 miles north of the station. Captain Sam Johnson would later write that they lost their yawl boat and owed Captain Lawson and their crew for their lives. Lawson had lost his stepbrother to the storm when the Myrtle crashed ashore near 25th Street in Chicago. John Bruner had taken a temporary leave from his saloon on Milwaukee Avenue to mate for his friend Captain Wilson.
Captain Lawson's last big rescue was in a fall gale of 1895. That's when the J. Emery Owen was pulling 2 coal-laden schooners for Chicago and unfortunately didn't make it.
36 lives hung in the balance, with Captain Wilson traveling with his wife and 6-month-old daughter on the barge Elizabeth Nicholson. When the Owen hit bottom, the Nicholson continued forward, crashing into the stern of the Owen. The barge was fatally cut and the crew moved to the steamer until rescue. Behind them was the mammoth barge Michigan, a double-deck, 3-masted behemoth that was 213 feet long. Lawson had 3 students that were 3-year veterans and 3 others that were new recruits. They were far from greenhorns, as they already had 80 lives rescued that season, and even with a hole in the lifeboat, they managed 3 trips to take all the crew, passengers, and their luggage off the ships. The Nicholson would break up in place, and eventually the lakes would take the other 2 ships as well. The Owen sank in 1909 on Lake Erie, and the Michigan and steamer M.M. Drake were lost to Lake Superior in 1901. Michigan was discovered by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society in 2021.
We have a shipwreck. Look at that. That's the stern. I think you can see the rudder right there.
Evanston student Lifesavers had a few more rescues before the station was closed and replaced with a Coast Guard facility at Wilmette. In 1909, they made headlines bringing in the crew of the Boston, which had lost steam traveling from Chicago. They pushed ashore near Kenilworth Avenue, and Evanston moved its cart to the wreck by horsepower and took automobiles 3 miles north to the wreck site. Like Spencer and Evans before him, his entire crew were underclassmen at the university. In 1930, the entire Coast Guard team vanished overnight on their way back from the Great Lakes Training Center. Blown off course, they ended up at Wilmette Harbor the next morning. Ironically, this is where their replacement station was being completed, opening that next year.
It's tough to say who's the most famous rescuer from Evanston, and certainly Edward Spencer has his place in history. But you also have to look at Captain Lawrence Lawson, who had 487 rescues, and this park is named in his honor.